Hi, I'm Angela Hart, Master Trainer with You Can Row 2 and Concept2. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about force curve. On your monitor, you have an onboard coach. It will be displayed on the bottom half of your monitor, and it will look like a graph that has kilograms and pounds along that vertical axis. I've taken some empty charts here. I'd like to be able to show you what some different force curves should look like, what an ideal force curve looks like, and then what force curves that show technical error will look like, and what those force curves are showing in terms of what technical error is actually happening with the body. So an ideal force curve is very smooth. It looks like a hill or a bell curve or a gumdrop or a haystack, but the idea is you want it to be smooth. So an ideal force curve will look something like this. Here, where the y-axis, which represents force, and the x-axis, which represents time, intersect at the origin, that is right at your catch position, right when your flywheel is at a stop and you are starting to generate power using your leg drive, your hip swing, and your arm pull. You will notice that the peak of that force curve is generated by the leg drive, which is about 60% of the rowing stroke's power. Then the idea is to maintain the curvature of that force curve with the hip extension and the arm pull. Hip extension is about 30% of your rowing stroke, and the arm pull is about the final 10%. Now, where this force curve comes all the way back down, that would actually link into the origin or the next force curve, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So again, ideal force curve, very smooth. Oftentimes you will see a force curve that looks like a mitten. It has a divot where it looks like someone took a sledgehammer to the force curve and put a dent in it. So if your force curve looks like a right-handed mitten, and you notice that there's elevation and then a divot and then elevation, that is typically indicative of lack of hip flexion or hip extension, meaning during the recovery, you did not get that good hip flexion, rotating the pelvis forward, and so you're not going to be able to generate good power from your hips because there's nowhere for the hips to extend into. So if your force curve looks like a mitten, and sometimes that mitten will actually be, hopefully, a little more elevated on that front end if you have a good strong leg drive. Here, because that first portion of that force curve is much lower than the second half, it's showing that there wasn't a big strong kick off the catch. So here we have that very similar sort of mitten shape, that divot. Good strong leg press, lack of hip extension or hip flexion. Keep in mind that we go into hip flexion on the recovery. We want to close that hip hinge, bringing the torso over the legs, so that then on the drive we get a good hip extension. We want to make sure that we go into a layback position. So if you see a divot in the first half of your force curve, it's very likely that you're not getting enough pelvic rotation. Maybe your hamstrings are tight, maybe you're coming just to more of an upright 90-degree position, but you want to make sure that you get about a 30-degree body angle, getting that nice anterior tilt of your pelvis. So what if the mitten looks like a left-sided mitten? What if the divot is in the second half? Here, you see that there's good execution of the legs and the hips, but there's your divot. And typically there, it's too much thoracic flexion. Maybe the upper back is a little too rounded. Maybe you lost that axial elongation from the tailbone up through the crown, or maybe your midline stability is a little lacking, meaning you would need to tighten up the muscles of your abdomen and back. making sure that you're not weakening into a rounded spine. So a lot of people will come into a very rounded back, pulling their shoulder blades away from their spine. Typically what we will see is that second half divot. So what are some other things you might notice with your force curve? If it's anything other than this really nice smooth hill, sometimes we'll see a force curve where it's all legs. Someone goes out real strong and doesn't carry that force through with the hips and the arms. So we have a big, strong press off the legs. We got that good 60% leg drive, but we're not seeing the carry through of the power with the hips and with the arms. So if you see a force curve that has a sudden drop off, make sure that you're not just blunting your power as soon as you're done with your legs. Make sure you're still generating power with that opening hip swing and the pulling of the arms. The opposite of that is someone who's not getting good connection with the legs right at the catch. They're not really connecting with the flywheel. So in that case, you'll see a force curve that looks relatively flat. And then the power comes in. So rather than having that strong kick off the catch, it's more passive. And it's like the legs don't really activate until after they've already started to extend out through the knee joint. So again, nice smooth force curve, that's ideal. If a force curve looks like a right-handed mitten, please check what's happening at your hips. Make sure you're getting flexion and extension. If it looks like a left-handed mitten, check your upper back. Make sure you're not rounding your spine. You want to take those shoulder blades back and down. Chest is up, abs are strong. Sudden drop off means the power is not being carried through with the hips and with the arms. So check on maintaining good power application from the catch all the way through to the finish. And if you're seeing a force curve that is relatively flat before taking elevation, work on getting that really good connection with the legs and the flywheel right off the bat. Now what I want to show here is what you're actually creating is individual stroke profiles. If your monitor could, it would actually link each force curve together. So where your force curves reconnect to that x-axis, that is the end of the time that it took your stroke. So if you were to link together your strokes, that is a pretty good example of 4 strokes done at a nice aerobic steady state. Each stroke is the same height in terms of power or force. Each stroke is the same length and sort of the time it took from catch to finish. And you'll notice that if we were able to continue these force curves from one stroke to the next, it would actually look very much like what you see here. Now for a longer profile, obviously each stroke will not be the same length per se, especially if you're mixing in harder, more intense strokes with easier, less intense strokes. For the sake of my chart, each little graph is the same length. But keep in mind that if you're taking a really powerful stroke, it's going to be a much higher force curve that will end a lot quicker. But again, linking together strokes, mixing in easy strokes, hard strokes. So the biggest thing to note is if you have a larger space underneath the curve, you've generated more force. If you have less space underneath that curve, it's a lot less force. So if you're rowing really easy recovery paddle row, your force curve might be barely visible above that horizontal axis. So again, have fun with your force curves. Really pay attention to what it's showing you because it's truly going to show what's happening within your body, the whole kinesthetic chain and the application of power from that leg drive, that push off with the legs, that opening swing of your hips moving from flexion into extension, and then that final pull of the arms towards your abdomen. And if you start to notice deviations in your force curve, make subtle changes to your rowing stroke so you can always bring yourself back to a force curve that is smooth. Keep in mind that smooth force curve might be very tall and very short, for a very high intense stroke, or that very smooth force curve might be very low and very wide for a less intense stroke. So that's force curve. You can also visit the Concept2 webpage. There's more information on force curve located on the Concept2 webpage and also in your You Can Row 2 instructor manual. Thank you so much, and this has been Force Curve.